Yeah.
For those,
Yeah.
welcome back
Yeah.
to the second of this year's Una's second event in this year's Una's lecture, our visit with the art historian Alexander Nemerov. So today, Alex is going to be in dialogue with my colleague Elisa Tamarkin from the English department. You will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And it's kind of wide-ranging, I'm assuming. It won't simply or solely focus on the drawing, but I'll just hand the mic figuratively over to you, Elisa.
Okay. So, Alex, I've known you since 1995 or 6. I sat in on your undergraduate lecture classes. I've sat in on your graduate classes. I've been your student. I saw today before I got here that I have 12 books that you've written in a row on my shelf.
Wow.
And that does not include other contributions that you've made to other books and anthologies and catalogs. So all to say, and for those of you who enjoyed this talk yesterday, you have to read as well. Reading the books can be akin to poetry. There are even moments in the book that one can scan like poetry. And there are other moments, in some ways, the most moving moments of Alex's later books that I say with admiration and awe, even rhyme. So all to say that I've been your student. So I wanted to start by turning back to yesterday and ask you a question about teaching, because that is where you started. You started by showing this image, Henry Ossawa Tanner's self-portrait that might be after Lazarus from 1910. And you said that there was no difference between the talk that you gave yesterday and your undergraduate lecture, and that there shouldn't be a difference, you thought, at this point, between a talk like the Una lecture and an undergraduate lecture. And you also let us know that the talk we would listen to was in medias res, insofar as the first slide you put up was your teaching slide, and it said chapter 7, and then the title, Love.
Yeah.
So we were learning what we were learning in the midst of a class. And I thought to myself, on a syllabus, what could possibly precede love so as to earn it, and what might follow from it? There was no preface yesterday except to say, you said, without love, you will not go far. And then you started. So I thought I would start by asking you, what do we need to offer to teach an image that moves us as an exercise in teaching? What do we want students to see insofar as this was a lesson? What exactly do you want students in looking at this Tanner self-portrait to learn? And how far with love, maybe, should they go? I don't want to call it takeaway, because that is but insofar as this is a lesson in how to look at this self-portrait, what do you want them to learn?
Yeah, I think part of it is just the experience. I think that the lecture for me is an event, like a lecture, an undergraduate lecture, for example, in the sense that it shouldn't necessarily be based on delivering some skills and information, though nicely it is predicated on that. It should be to create an experience that is outside of their ordinary, the run of the day for them and for me. So in that sense, it would be inexplicable. It would be that you know it, you know the truth of it, even when though you can't explain it, something like that.
So I'm as interested in what you left out of the lecture, thinking about the lecture as a lesson. Not that it needed to be in there, but what you didn't feel was necessary to the lesson of what you get out of an image like this when you're teaching someone to look at an image like this. The fact, for example, of anything else that Tanner had drawn or painted.
Yeah, I have 50 minutes or an hour. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm not trying to cover the bases. That's a disaster.
Okay.
If you don't speak from the heart at every single moment, and you could be totally wrong, you know, though at least your wrongness is redeemed by virtue of your sincerity or your earnestness and your belief in what you're doing. But like, I could never turn it into like, this is what you need to know. Let me give you some background. Or if I did, it would have to be artfully done in such a way that it followed through in the story.
But even sort of the fact that Henry Ossawa Tanner was known primarily for painting religious paintings, biblical scenes.
You're right. I mean, in medias res is right in terms of this is just like a relatively new lecture. When I first decided to give a love lecture for my class, it was more heavily predicated on those 3 paintings that made an interlude in the lecture last night. And then the Tanner began to be more than a bit player and become very large. And then I thought, why couldn't I just do it all on the Tanner lecture or picture? And I think that's nice pedagogically, because the fewer things are on the screen, the more memorable the lecture is. The sense of like a slow intensity of looking happens, and if the lecturer considers his craft decently and generously enough, it should not be you know, one of those and yet another thing, or here's another point, which are the, of course, deadliest of all transitions in spoken and written prose. Yeah, I could go on, but I won't.
There was well, it's the same, it's along the same lines. You had this sort of lovely moment, the self-reflexive moment in which you showed us the drawing in its folder in the reading room in the Smithsonian. And then you had taken a picture of it in its folder and then also your notebook for it. And you were speaking to, and it was about Stanford as well. You were talking about the institutions in which we look at these images and how much institutional grounding it took, whether it was the museum, the library, the reading room in the museum, or Stanford itself, how much institutional grounding it takes to show something that is without support, right? In other words, to show something that cannot be supported.
I cannot support, you know, I cannot support what I say, but that's the point. That's what's supportable about what I do, is that it can't be supported, or it is supported institutionally, but the conclusions are thanks to these institutions, that which cannot be supported, and meaning I think some notion of soul, of spirit, beauty, reflection, all that can't be categorized, and that we are the keepers of.
In the forest, do you say something similar, where you implore us not to be doubting Thomases, not to have to, not to require vulgar proof.
Right.
You also often talk about the need, having had all this institutional support, to at a certain point abandon discipline, right? Abandon certain kinds of, abandon your discipline, however you would want to define it, right? In the beginning of your book, Fierce Poison, Helen Frankenthaler, you talk about how long it took for you to finally be able to engage with her work. And you describe it as a form of abandoning expertise, that there was a point at which the discipline had to be abandoned for you to finally feel like you could return to her work with any kind of sincere engagement.
Yeah, I think I connected that in that intro to teaching, and my revelation about teaching was that I should have the guts to speak as a person moved, that as a, as a person really affected by the art, and to predicate it on that. Yeah.
So would you have taught this self-portrait differently 2 decades ago?
Oh, yes.
How?
It wouldn't have been as good, I'll tell you that. I would say, it's like Stephen was talking about when he first started here, the chancellor had these faculty lunches, and the adage about the mathematicians having their moment at age 27 and the humanists, it takes a long time. At age 61, I'm in the latter category. So all the false steps or this merely smart observations about works like this would be all part of the necessary building blocks to be able to now be in the zones of, they're kind of religious or mystical zones. Yeah, I just gave a talk on Friday in Vermont, and a good friend of mine was there, and he said afterward, because I was really funny in that talk, and he was a little disturbed by that. He was like, he said, usually you are so, he's from Poland. He's like, usually you are so prophetic and, downcast. And like, you were a little, this was his word, unhinged. And I thought that was funny, but I'm glad I can laugh. I'm glad I can tell a joke now. Yeah. So that's.
I would not have thought of, I mean, because.
Was I funny back then?
No.
Yeah. Okay, good. Right.
You are now.
Yeah, I'm super, super funny. Someone said, if you want to win teaching awards, Alex, you have to smile more. It's like, okay, noted. Out of my way.
So that seems related to me to something I noticed in the talk yesterday that I've also noticed in so much else that I've read. You were remembering, this reminded you of those 3 images that you liked as a child.
As an adolescent.
As an adolescent. You said we shouldn't be afraid to ask adolescent questions, right? To be able to return
Right.
to adolescent questions. The Helen Frankenthaler book, begins with a discussion of her at Dalton in high school, at Bennington in college. It takes on Frankenthaler in her earlier years, which may be one reason why you call her Helen, right? Throughout
Maybe,
the
yeah.
book, right? But a kind of childishness or adolescent questions that we shouldn't feel afraid to revisit. We shouldn't feel
Absolutely.
embarrassed.
Yeah,
to
a friend of
revisit.
mine who was a PhD student at Yale and now teaches at the University of Leiden, and who's a Holocaust scholar. She just published her first book and just sent me a copy. It's about the fact that if you really look at it historically, the Holocaust has been thought to be representable, and so it's about the actual representations of it, and it's not an iconoclastic book at all. It's a deeply caring and religious book. In any case, this scholar, whose name is Kate, she told me once that she first realized the world was beautiful when she was 11 years old, walking across a bridge after the rain in Atlanta, which is where she grew up. And so, that was formative. I was telling my students that I think you may think there's a contradiction between her walking across that bridge and then becoming a Holocaust scholar, but to me, there's no contradiction at all. I think she feels the world deeply, urgently, and is kind of dumbstruck by what it has to offer. And I think I'm the same way. A lot of experiences in true romantic or Wordsworthian fashion, I feel, for me, when I was a kid, are utterly formative. And I just wrote an essay about my parents for the first time and what that was like to grow up in people who really haunted individuals, though loving, but hurt individuals, and how their experience in the Second World War played out in my life. So that was a freeing thing, you know. So that's the font, I would say, for me, the source, yeah.
And also, I mean, the sense of youth, that also, again, thinking about the Frankenthaler book, suggests room for levity, right? I mean, it goes back to the sense of being funny. You say part of what draws you to Frankenthaler in these moments in which she's trying to capture things that are ambient or fleeting, is the kind of lightness that she doesn't carry with her, the
Right.
gravity of art at mid-century, and that a turn to her is a kind of endorsement of certain forms of lightness, certain forms of levity as
Exactly.
against gravity, even a kind of
Yeah.
disciplinary gravity, right?
Yeah,
If-
and she said the lightest touch is the hardest of all, which I think as academics we could heed. Her paintings are very, they look almost like a watercolor, although they're painted in oil and acrylic, like just staining colors on raw cotton canvas, and to you know, horrified critics in the 50s, they were likened to paint rags, and you know, her ostensible allies among the young artists, her peers in 1950s New York, they thought, they were scandalized by how light these works are, as if light can never be serious. And they were basically telling her, joking behind her back, you know, speaking of Helen's wealth, you know, it looks like she made the paintings between cocktails and dinner. She did not like that when that got back to her. Also, Helen, you know, it's basically the version of people are dying, like get with it, like, you know, move to a cold water, walk up flat on the 6th floor, and, you know, make your work in epic cycles of exhilaration and despair. Try that. Don't do this whole pastel color thing. But of course, what they failed to realize is she was a better painter than they were. And because she was willing to go there to a lightness that has plenty of gravity.
It's
And
just not overworked. Right?
it's not overworked. Yeah, you got to leave enough alone, leave well enough alone. But also, I think your question brings up, for me, really important fact, which is all the artists I've written about, going back to Raphael Peale, you know, one of the great ventriloquist artists of all time. That was a joke, but anyway, they're all my advisors. They're my real advisors. You know, from 6 feet under, they're kind of coaching me. Yeah, that's it. You know, that's what a painting is. And so I think I'm not an artist myself, because artist was taken in my family. This is the story I tell myself. My father was a poet and my aunt was a photographer. So in a seeming act of defeat and confusion, I decided to become an academic because I understood that that was a little safer, like you're in your little rowboat near the shore. You're not the captain of the schooner with no land in sight, which is being an artist. But I think the nice thing is I've learned how to become an artist by virtue of studying art. You know, so it's a simple thing. You meet art with art, right? All of the writers about culture in here know it well, is that you create something new about what you write about, and you create yourself in the writing. And I know when I was chair of my department, I would lead faculty discussions every time. I would start it off with, like, what do you want out of your work? Like, what is your what is your life's work? Or, just as an open, almost like outlandishly provocative question. Partly because I just couldn't suffer any more small talk about credits and units and is the falafel salad coming in 10 minutes or do I have to wait? That kind of thing. So it was preemptive, cautionary on my part, but it was serious too, because like we all make a body of work as scholars and it's our mark and it's profoundly unterritorial, I think. It's a generous thing. It's an offering to other people.
It's clear in a book like The Forest, you see artists everywhere, right? It's not just the painters who are the artists or the authors, the famous authors, famous painters, Edgar Allan Poe and Hawthorne and others who are the artists, but it's the peddlers, it's the people who are making art, paper cutouts. It's the sign makers.
And they're all mystic too.
And
I like that.
Right.
Yeah, like 57 vignettes, 57 different mystic artists in one place in time, namely the last decade, the 1830s, when there was a mixture of primeval forest and human habitation in this country. And yeah, the people I write about have in their hearts something they can't know and don't want to know, but are able to articulate.
And it speaks to, what you're saying, what is your life's work?
Yeah.
What does the artist do? The artist, at least all of these artists, make visible for us something that we hadn't seen.
Yeah, visible in its hiddenness.
In
right?
its hiddenness.
In its hiddenness.
At a moment
Yeah.
when, this is a moment of deforestation. It's about the forest. There are, you describe Forestville, Connecticut, where the trees are cut down in order to manufacture clocks. And you actually try to imagine what fell under the shade of the trees at the moment of their disappearance.
Yeah.
Can we recreate for ourselves? Can we conjure up, is the word you might use, or summon even that sense of light? Not to mention all the figures themselves that appeared in that shade that was then disappearing even as you write it. I actually want to just read a couple lines from The Forest as a way of not talking necessarily about the forest, but about the artist more generally and in almost everything you've written. As introduction to The Forest, you say, my artists, my characters are mystics, traveling paths of realization. You say, this is not at different moments. You say each is an episode, so all of these vignettes you described, each is an episode, an impression, not an argument or claim. You say this book is a fable, not a history. You say it is based on the historical record, though only some of it is true. Yet I hope that something real is revealed, a lost world of intricate relations. And it ends with a postscript, which is an apocryphal, but I won't necessarily use that word, story of what motivated the manuscript, which is the story of a polished wooden shield that is found by a girl at a stream and picked up by an antiquarian who wipes it clean with his handkerchief. And maybe the antiquarian was taken for a ride. Maybe the whole thing is a hoax. Maybe not. And you have come across this. And on this shield is a set of figures, but the shield is gone. And all you have left is the handkerchief, right? To allude to the shield that is gone that may never have been authentic to begin with. And all of it reminded me, though you don't mention it, and maybe this wasn't its source, of the beginning of The Scarlet Letter, where the narrator of The Scarlet Letter says that the capital letter A was found in scarlet red, embroidered in gold.
It's lovely. Wow.
And the letter that is found was found in an attic. It has a story behind it,
Mhm.
and the story that follows is it. I wasn't sure if that was your source, the idea of this found object.
Good.
That,
Wow. I mean, I am,
but Hawthorne is in here. Yeah.
Hawthorne starts.
There are these presiding spirits like Emerson who almost never
My
appears.
talk in Vermont on Friday was about Hawthorne.
Yeah.
Celestial Railroad.
Huh?
So
Anyway,
I was not thinking of Scarlet Letter, but I'm so honored by the analogy or the comparison. And what I have consciously thought is the book begins with Hawthorne, and Hawthorne is my, I mean, he's kind of my ideal of an intelligence responding to that moment. So it's not, I remember it was during COVID, that book was written during COVID. I was still chair and I was just thinking, I had this book in mind, I'm just going to start it and just try not to be too precious. Like, I'm just going to start. Just start, Alex, on 3:45 on a July afternoon. Type a sentence, and it's guy cuts down a tree. Like, okay, what happens next? And so that's coming out of Hawthorne, though, that whole vignette. And then, so he was my guide, my mentor, my advisor, and kind of by the logic I'm talking about, that the people we write about become us and we become them in a kind of interfusing in which the two never quite meet, but they're interfused. Yeah.
and so all of this, the idea of the fable, the idea of this object that needs to be rediscovered, that is beyond our
Yeah.
reach, the idea of trying to arrive at something that will always be beyond our reach, the idea of seeing something that isn't there. And there's always this sense that throughout, your sense of reality consists in things that are not actually there, or in seeing things that are not there. You have your characters say these things say things like that often.
Yeah.
There's this figure in The Forest, Halliwell, Martha Ann Halliwell.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes, Martha Ann Halliwell.
And you say reality for Martha Ann Halliwell, reality consists of what is not there. Martha Ann Halliwell was born without arms and without legs, and is an artist who
Yes.
made paper
Yeah, she
cutouts,
was like
right?
this tall, and she had toes on one foot, and she had her elbows, and with her mouth and her elbows and her toes, she could write the Lord's Prayer in text the size of a penny in the midst of this intricate cutout pattern. Yeah, she's a heroic figure.
And everything is a
and
cutout, right? I mean, what's actually there
She got
isn't.
her scissors, she got her pens, and it's a
But you're
cutout, so it's not
framing
there.
absences, right? You're
Absolutely,
framing
yeah.
what is
Framing
not
herself,
there.
yeah.
You're finding a way to kind of feel your way around something that's invisible, something that is gone.
Yeah, yeah, but doing so to go back to your point, in a light way, like not the melancholy, like getting a handle on the melancholy, understanding a melancholy is not like the gold standard of profundity or anything like that, which I think is, for me at least, has been a danger.
You actually say something at some
Do I?
point that, the melancholy historian would find
Something.
what? Something
Yeah,
something
I just
else,
think,
right?
yeah, I think I see it with my young PhD students too. Everyone wants to go to town on disappointment and frustration and rage and anger and sadness, and I get it. But I just think at my age, I think the lightness or the peace is actually more profound, and it's not comatose by any stretch. It's as Helen Frankenthaler said, it's a very vibrant, Elysian kind of space, you know, it's a very disturbing space. You might think of Van Gogh, for example, as a good example of a lightness that is intense, like not for everyone. Yeah.
Before we open it up, I'm going to quote to you what you say about the painter Sanford Gifford. And maybe you can say what you mean, either in terms of his paintings or in terms of, I would say, almost everything I've read that you've written over the past decade. Gifford's pictures dwell on this fact that what we cannot know is a part of our reality, that what we can never experience is a part of our experience.
Yeah, wow, that sounds good. I like that. I think that.
What does that
What does it mean
to
Yeah,
you
what does
in
it
terms
mean?
of art?
Yeah,
Or
I
in
think
terms of just Gifford even?
just Gifford, he painted distances. There's a nice painting of his at the De Young. He's kind of he's my favorite of the Hudson River painters. He paints these, you know, things get atmospheric and diffuse in the distance. He loves that. It's his vision of God, even though it's just the sun setting over the Berkshires. It's very godly. In the book, I talk about how he came upon that style just when his older brother, who he was very close to, they both went to Brown, and he too, the older brother, was aesthetically minded. He was a drug addict, just like people are now, in terms of taking advantage of like a medically beneficent new product on the market, which in the 1840s was chloroform, and ultimately took his own life. It was at that moment that Gifford saw these distances and painted them in such a great way. And I have visited Sanford Gifford's grave in Hudson, New York, and it's, you know, with some real respect. Yeah.
You often go to the sites
I do, yeah.
and photograph them
Yeah.
yourself, right?
One time, I wasn't actually there for this, but a friend of mine in Hudson wrote to me and sent a picture of what I'm about to describe, which just shows that Gifford, I'm not the only one who likes this artist. He, some dude, I'll call him a dude, some dude like had gone ahead and died and gotten himself buried like right next to Gifford. Like, hey, uncool. Like no one, you didn't have permission. I get that you like his art. You can't be buried, you know, you can't have your friend bury you right next to the guy. So, right, my affection is different. It's for this artist. It's, yeah, but it's to do with, you know, my own brother was a drug addict for many years. Did I ever tell you that? Yeah, so just a bad, probably fairly typical situation. He was ultimately killed and in prison, actually, beaten to death by other prisoners. That was in 2014. But when I saw what clicked for me with the Gifford is his relationship with his brother. And then that's an example of me getting to write personally, but not personally. And again, in this interfusing, which you just need, what would you say? A light touch, right? Just a light touch. So in this meeting, because we have such a short time, I can go ahead and like speed to different punchlines and declarations because time is short, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak to all of you and to Elisa, so I don't mind at all like getting right to it. But on the page, yeah, we all know this, it's a kind of weave, and it's always deadly serious and light at the same time.
I want to open it up to questions, but I just want to say one thing about your claim that all of your characters all of your artists are mystics. Because I think one of the things that's important to realize as you're describing what isn't there is that even something like the forest is is so deeply, your sense of having these sort of moments of levitation that are still grounded, like the image
Yeah.
that you showed of, whose image was it from your childhood of Christ
Yeah,
reading
Christ and Mary in the
and
house of
Mary,
Nazareth.
right,
Yeah,
right.
they're grounded and flying.
They're
yeah.
grounded and flying at the same time. That all of these ways of trying to recreate what we can never know or what we can never reach or never see is so deeply based in a recovery of the literature, the writing, the diaries, the letters, the images, the anecdotes from this
Yeah.
period. It is a deeply archival work.
Yeah, yeah.
And what seems mystical about it, we have experts in this room on mysticism, is that in some ways what you do is see things in these objects that have been there all along, or these figures, writings, images that have been
Yes.
there all along. And if you concentrate on them, if you press into them, they become fantastical. That the longer you look, you actually locate a weirdness, a strangeness. I mean, where does the wilderness go? It goes into the wildness that you find in Poe, in Hawthorne,
yeah.
in all of these figures, that you're finding what isn't visible, but you're actually finding it by looking deep into something that is very grounded. I mean, in the sense that there is still something to see. Just trying to make sense for myself of what makes these works.
Yeah, I think my idea for the whole book was, if you cut down a tree in the forest, a writer's pen ceases to work. For that line, there's a blank, drawing a blank. So I had this in basically this idea that the you know, that wildness you spoke about goes out of American writing, you could say, almost. But that couldn't literally be true. But you can see the attractiveness of the concept that you know, that in the metaphor of the organic, one would welcome a forest around, even if a forest wasn't one's topic, because that forestness, that wildness would permeate one's writing.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah, the more civilized the culture becomes, the more civilized the writing becomes, hence less wild. And
That's, I mean,
yeah.
I will open it up to questions now, but you also described the very end of the 1830s, 1839,
Yeah.
as the patenting of the photograph. Right?
Yeah.
A different, I mean, why the 1830s? There's a wilderness that is gone. There's a new form of registering reality, documenting reality,
Yeah.
that somehow seems to lose these shadows, although you also describe early photography as preserving these shadows in that way, but as a kind of pivotal moment that ends at the end of.
Yeah, I think one way to describe it is the idea of the shift from the visible to the visual. That the visual is, you know, visual culture, like everything. It's intersected with democracy. It's kind of creates this somewhat numbing plurality and equality of all utterances that, of course, inundate the real and replace it, etc. The visible is more like the reflections of a tree on a stream, like it's just pure, sensuous, kind of autonomous, almost autistic visibility, like, you know, being, I guess we could call it. And so, yeah, photography, no secret, is an enemy of visibility, where only the greatest photographers are able to make the visible appear in the visual. Very hard to do. Yeah.
I'll open it up. Questions? Yeah.
I can start. It was so lovely to hear you two talk. And I think it was like in part because I think you have a teacher-student relationship that's now like a colleague relationship. And it was lovely to sort of see that on display. So I wanted to talk, last night I was thinking a lot about kinds of love. And I think you did a really good job, I think, describing like romantic love is not the kind of love that you're thinking about with spiritual love, but it might be more akin to like paternal love or some sort of unconditional love. And I wondered if you think of that unconditional love as always having a kind of like one-to-one relationship, or if it has a kind of singularity, because I hear like something similar in the way you talk about artists that you write about or in relationship to, and maybe thinking the same thing about students in kind of a one-on-one capacity. I don't know if there's a way that you think at all about some sort of other term that might be like community or might be like students in general or like the nation or like
Right, so as
yeah,
against singularity.
as against
Yeah,
singularity.
no, thank you, Lauren. That's really nice. And thank you for the shout out about, yes, it's so nice to be here up front with Elisa. Um, you know, Kierkegaard says the crowd is untruth. Seems right to me. So I think it is a profoundly solitary endeavor, what we do. And then as I try to tell my students, because they understandably recoil from the seeming solipsism of Kierkegaard's understanding of what Paul says in one of his letters, which is only one wins the race, which sounds a lot like it's a capitalist free for all, and there's no community, no nothing. But actually, for Kierkegaard, what Paul means is you have to take care of your own business. You have to attend to your own soul first before the world will change. That seems utterly accurate to me, or I have faith in that. So the move, if you like, though it's not really a move, it's just my way of doing it, is to go inward in order to change the world. So I think the word community can be quite weaponized. And it seems to me really, in many cases, to be, in an academic context, to be often almost a polite synonym for crowd. And that scares me. But obviously, as witness both the events here at Berkeley, I can just tell you, no kidding, like, I don't know if this is a community or what it is, but it's a good, nice, generous, welcoming environment of such a lovely nature. I think that makes me think that we're all individuals, and we're all we're honoring our individuality in a way that transcends any capitalistic or bureaucratic definition. We're going inward, and that's what I mean when I say this is a beautiful audience. It's a reflective, it's self-reflecting, like the tree in the water. It's purely of itself. Each one of you is thinking, basically, is what I'm saying. So for me, individual kind of is a social category.
In the forest, there is a line, I think it's a sentence, but there's only 3 words in it. It reads, halo, hollow, hello. I don't know if I got in the right order. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And it ends a paragraph, and so it's the final thought, and I felt like I still wanted a little bit more illumination on those three
Yeah.
words.
I think that might be in Moose and Stencil, maybe, which is my favorite, maybe one of my most favorite ones. Though I really like the epigraph, or I'm sorry, the closing remarks, the postscript that you mentioned. Well, I'm not even going to look at the book and try to recreate. I'm going to just go halo, hollow, hello. I think they're italicized in the text. I think it's maybe playing lightly, meditating seriously on the commonality between those words. Halo, hollow, like emptiness and grace, like voids and grace. You don't have to read Simone Weil to think in those terms. And hollow, and then hello. Yeah, exactly, a greeting. To be greeted by grace in the form of an absence, that makes sense to me. I was just in my trip in Vermont, I was up in the mountains for a while, and I was the airplanes are coming over Vermont at such a high altitude because the European flights have reached their cruising altitude, so you can't even hear them, and you can see them in the clear air coming from so far away, and they look almost with the vapor trails like contrails, like they're standing straight up in the atmosphere. It's hard to describe, but you just see these plumes like this, and those seem like moments of, is this nothing at all? What is this? It feels like a supernatural token, so halo, and it's a greeting. It's somehow naming you. To connect to Lauren's point, it's like naming you individually. You know, James Schuyler has such a beautiful poem about his friend Jane Freilicher, the great painter, and he's describing all kinds of things, including how in a melting late winter snow, the snow is so wet it kind of holds and curls under like little iron filigree bars, and on the underside of stone plinths and things like that. And he says, and Jane, it's all for you, meaning the world is just showing, in effect saying hello to the person who can see it by virtue, because it recognizes that friendship, that cordiality in the person who, whatever is alive mystically or otherwise, to the supernatural or the strange. We were talking about this earlier today, what is most unbelievable is true. And then that, to connect to Lauren's point again, is like a ground, and your point too, Lisa, it's like a grounding thing. Instead of being like an internet rumor or some kind of irresponsible stupidity or whatever it would take, like I'm a visionary, I got it. In other words, it's so grounding when you see something in the sky, like a tree, for example, but just you feel more rooted, more responsible, more beholden, more is required of you in those moments, not less, as you escape, as yourself becomes something more than your driver's license or your passport. More is required of you as a teacher, you know, as in any aspect of your life. And it's almost like the beauty of it is how fragile and fallen or stained from last night we all are, including certainly starting with me. I mean, that somehow makes it more intense and more beautiful, and there's more responsibility involved of a good kind, like the kind you would wish for. And that's halo, hollow, and hello. Yeah.
One more question. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate this. So a question I have is, you mentioned about seeing the shadow of the tree on the ground. Was that your view on that? Was that innate? Is that something you've had since the beginning, or is that something you learned? And if you learned, how so?
Do you mean that general kind of awareness of
Yeah,
noticing?
yeah,
Yeah.
just as an example.
I think it would be, my poet father certainly must have inculcated some of this, but, we were not, my brother and I were not like chained to our desks and forced to write quadrilles, as youths. I mean, it was very laissez-faire, I'll say. So I think I just kind of picked it up by osmosis, and my two brothers, though they're very poetic, were in our poetic souls. Certainly are as far away from being academics as you could possibly imagine, or artists. I don't know. I think just being a loner, being a sensitive soul, or in William James' term, which my students are always asking me about, a sick soul. Like, I'm a sick soul in James's positive sense. Like, he has the opposite of the sick soul. This is in Varieties of Religious Experience, is systematic healthy mindedness, which is basically like, hey, come on, it's a nice day, let's go for a run, which is great. I'm envious of it, but yeah, I think, for many of us, like, what to do with our own sadness, which has either been given to us at birth or bestowed upon us in other formations and situations, or both, of course. That's the question. And the shadow of the tree, yeah, it's more mystical than the tree, even. More enticing, more seductive, more nothing, more hollow, more of a halo, more of a greeting. What does one do with that? I mean, many have been the days when I've performed an expertise which sells far, far short all the weirdness that I'm fulminating about now. But I wish it weren't so, but it's a long path to get to state, to be able to say with authority what you don't know about yourself, starting with that. And, my students are just young enough to not get this at all and to totally get it at the same time. It's the adults I'm more concerned with, because I think present company accepted the whole business of becoming an adult consists in farming a lot of this stuff I'm talking out to, like the leisure sector of your emotional life, which, as many people long before me have pointed out, has disastrous consequences for self and community. But that's the way the world is. So one is the lonely contemplator of the shadows of trees, for better or for worse, for one's whole life. And if one is lucky, one comes to some kind of love that is stronger than the despair, which wants to suck you down. And it's a day-to-day thing. It's a practice. It's a discipline. And it's great. It's a great way to be. And it's hard. Yeah.
Alex, one of the subtitle for the talk yesterday, before it was removed, was Art as Awakening as Breath. And so just along those lines, I was trying to think, you talk about breath everywhere as inspiration, and as art as forms of inspiration. And at one point in Wartime Kiss, you describe an inspirational mode like breath, unabashedly, and not without some embarrassment. In fact, the vulnerability of the historian to ridicule is part of it. And I loved that moment, not only because it reminded me of the breath that was not there last night and the sense of inspiration, but also just the vulnerability that you're speaking to now, the opening up of something without embarrassment. You've also described it.
Yeah, I hosted an artist at Stanford a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, very smart, lovely person, she said, I think vulnerability is a scam. And I kind of understood, like there's a TED Talk kind of vulnerability where, you know, I'm going to get real with you, but only so we can, you know, become more successful somehow. And so I was granting her that, but I must have, over a glass of wine, I must have been able to articulate the true vulnerability, that it's not a scam. So, yeah, I think, what is that? I think it's when you have nothing fucking to lose. That's it. Or better, I'll go one better. You're not trying to persuade anyone of anything. That's it. That's it. God, that took me a long time. You know, I'm a teacher, so it's like, you must believe what I'm about to say. Like, no. After 3 decades, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. I can just try to articulate some, sort of portray it in the round and then walk away. And I think that's right. You have nothing to lose, and it's not a transactional thing. And that must come just from, you know, if my wife were here, she'd be saying, honey, you're not always peaceful, so I don't totally believe what you're going to say here, which is that I feel more peaceful. I feel more loving, like I don't know, and it's amazing what that can do. Amazing in the sense of a maze or a labyrinth, like it's taking you into getting lost, and that softens one. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that vulnerability. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.